Welcome, everyone. I'm Angela Hood. I'm the founder and CEO of This Way Global, and I have a wonderful friend joining us today that I have known for a number of years. And now we're going to have to actually think back how many years we've known each other. But Norma, please introduce yourself and tell everyone what SpeakTu does.
Well, welcome and thank you, Angela, for the invitation. It's also amazing to see the journey that you've taken with your company and the work that you're doing to ensure that there is an unbiased talent acquisition, in place. So my name is Norma Marquez Barahona, and I'm the co-founder of SpeakTu. And SpeakTu is a workforce insight analytics that provides employers with data relevant to the workforce makeup, and that could include gender, minority, non-binary employees, and so all the dimensions of diversity that you want to see within your own culture. We also help companies put that fair pay reporting for California and the EU report for the federal government. So more than anything, our company does analytics to look at pay equity or inequalities across the workforce within an organization.
Yeah, so that is a huge, huge topic. I mean, so Norma and I met through WeBank. This Way is a certified woman-owned business, and at that point in time, you were with, I believe, the second largest staffing agency in the world. And we met and we're starting to discuss like what happens in the workplace around women, because we were at a women-based conference. But what happens to women happens to everyone that has been overlooked or undervalued. And so tell me a little bit about the statistics that you have shared with me about what happens with pay equity relative to people who are often just dismissed as being equally qualified when they are incredibly qualified.
Absolutely. And, Angela, this is a journey that has taken women years, right? Since the first time that they got the rights to vote, and then they enter the workforce. And we know that many years ago, history was that, women didn't have to work because the men were the breadwinners in the family. So therefore, they always made less than men.
Right.
And so to today, women still make 83 cents to the dollar, and male makes in the same role. And that's the average of women across the U.S. And then when it comes to minorities, it's even lesser, right? The inequalities, the gaps are even bigger. So you're looking at African Americans making 64 cents to the dollar, and then Latinas 57 cents to that dollar. So there's huge gaps within the pay equity across gender, and then it even deeper when it comes to minorities.
So I have a question about this. So when we're talking about people that are brown and black, right? So gender is one thing, skin color is another. Neither should cause people to be paid less. But are you sharing with me that if you're darker skinned, then your pay is going to be in some ways almost just half of what a white person would be paid?
Absolutely.
I do not understand. I mean, like, honestly, that's a bigger gap than I even realized. I thought okay, so in the 60% is terrible, right? But you're saying 57%. So 57 cents to every dollar
that a white male makes in the same position as what Latinas are currently making.
That is okay. So I will tell you, honestly, I get a little frustrated with some of the laws that come out that are supposed to be, evening the playing field, because a lot of times they have unintended consequences, right? But California comes out with a rule that says that you have to publish compensation inside your job descriptions when you post them out. So I have a question to you. Do you know what is happening? Like, are people posting like, here's one job and it's for this pay scale, and here's another job for 60, 70% less? Or what's happening with the postings? Do you know?
So what we're seeing is New York is driving that Fair Pay Transparency Act, and it's very much posting the job, the ranges of the salaries that employees require for that individual, for that particular position. But we're seeing, Angela, I looked at some of the job postings, and they had from $0 to $2 million.
Okay.
So are those ranges currently, it's just, is it meet a requirement and check the box, or they're truly driving market value for some of those opportunities? what happens is also California has the Fair Pay Act, which means that you got to provide that report on an annual basis of all any employer that has 100 employees or more in the state of California. And that, to make sure that we measured, pay equity by race and gender, and then how long the employee has been in the company. So that brings a little bit of transparency. Now, how are you holding those companies accountable? What is the next step, right? Because we focus on people, data, and impact, ultimately without looking at how did I drive truly impact? And we know that women across the U.S., if they make $10,000 more, that is the difference, Angela, between being able to afford a house, a car, having childcare, or even health insurance, right? So the economic empowerment of those women making additional dollars is huge.
Well, and
It
also
drives the
just
economy.
independence. I mean, this is like, I'm independent. I'm able to survive on my own. I don't have to live with another person if I don't want to. And I'm not even saying like a partner. I'm just saying I don't have to have a roommate. I can live independently because I make enough money to do so. Okay, so now I have another question about this. It's interesting. So if people are advertising, or if the state employers are advertising $0 to $2 million, so that's actually not giving anyone any kind of an indication whatsoever. So what do you think what the candidates are thinking about this, or the applicants thinking about this?
No, they're probably thinking that they truly don't care, right? They're just meeting the requirement, because what happens too is the candidate goes to interview, and they typically ask you, right, Angela, what is your salary requirement?
Right.
They don't necessarily disclose what's the salary range that they have.
Right.
And there's bands within those salary ranges.
Right.
And so women, sometimes, and, this is where SpeakTu is so important to me, right? Because it brings transparency to the fair pay across the gender and minorities. But it also, in the back end, we want to empower women to have those conversations, to do more research, to make sure that they know how much are their value and how to position their skills in the market, right? Ultimately, they have to drive those conversations as well to help us. We do know that there's also biases within the hiring practices, right? And everyone's trying to save dollars when they bring in top talent to their organizations. But at the end of the day, what is the impact of that dollar in retention? Right?
Yeah, so we know that most people move companies in order to get pay raises because they have trouble getting pay raises inside their own company. And so it contributes greatly to why we see that people don't stay at companies for even 2 years. So we have that data. We know that that's true. The other thing that I know that we are very aware of is that the fluctuation in the markets in the last 2.5 years has been absolutely incredible, something we've never seen before. Like the level of the change and fluctuation in salary is so huge. So what is your forecast? Is if you had a crystal ball and you're looking forward at 2024, what do you think is going to happen with compensation?
I think that compensation is still going to be compensation is still going to be going higher, and because there are certain individuals driving those conversations. But if you think about the pandemic, during the pandemic, women were already in a soared, upward incline of making themselves, go into positions that perhaps leadership positions, right, within an organization. And then what happened during the pandemic? Most of the women left the workforce because they became the primary caregivers of the families and children. And so that puts us. There was a study that I learned about, and they said that put us 20 years behind again.
Yeah.
Right. So now you're talking about, the market is driving a lot of those high salaries. But again, when we go for those job interviews, are we asking for the salary that matches our skills, or are we simply just taking the job? Because I guarantee your counterparts are not just taking the job. They're negotiating. They're looking beyond the benefits, right? And the culture fit.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I will say specifically as a female engineer, I had 2 small children at one point in my career, and I knew for a fact I was getting paid significantly less. And I would have very open conversations, and people would say to me, my employers would say things like, well, we know that you might get pregnant again, you might leave again, or, we can't really count on you the same way that we can on men. And I was like, based off of what? Because I would look at the hours I had worked, the projects I had completed. I was not taking vacation. I think a lot of times as women, at least, if you're a caregiver of your children. So I'm a military spouse. So if your spouse is out, in a deployment, you are the primary child caregiver. But I always had backups. I always had other women that we shared responsibilities with each other during the deployments. And so I would tell the employer, I'm like, you don't have to worry about that. If one of my kids gets sick, or if someone needs to be picked up from school, I have backups to make sure that happens. So I should not be, my salary should not be affected by that. And it fell on deaf ears.
Yeah, so it's so important, Angela, right? Because sometimes our value is, often in times I hear this conversation a lot, is our value as a woman, it's attached to something else, right? It's not necessarily just our own contributions. It's attached to, well, she's a good mother because she takes care of her children. She takes them to school. Well, she's a good wife because she cooks for her husband. Right. Or she's a good worker because she's always a team player, right? So why is it that our value as a female and professional female can't just be given for us, right? It always has to be validated with something else rather than just the work that we put in.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. So I want to find out a little bit more about, you are a entrepreneur, and I know there's a lot of men and women out there in the world that are contemplating possibly stepping out and being an entrepreneur themselves. So what have you learned over the last year that you would say that you would like to share with other people considering that?
It's interesting, Angela, because one of the things that is the hardest thing for women, and especially women of color, is to believe in ourselves, right? And sometimes it takes somebody else to say, you know what, you got an idea. And I want to explore that idea with you, right? I know that you value, and interesting, my co-founder, it's a man, right? And he's like, Norma, I never listened to women until I met you. And now it makes me wonder how many missed opportunities I had in my life because I didn't take the time to listen to women. Right. So oftentimes women in corporate America, we have a seat at the table where we don't have a voice.
Right.
Right. And so through that is that we have ideas and we can make things better, but we're just not given the opportunity. And I think through this entrepreneurship, opportunity that I have, there is a thing, and this is all sometimes cultural, even for and I would say for Latinas especially, is that they oftentimes were thought that, and I'm going to say in Spanish and then I'll repeat in English, but it says, calladita te ves más bonita, which means the quieter you are, the prettier you look.
Wow.
So the mind shift has to happen within our own culture, right? So it's the culture of saying, you know what, I have an idea, I have a voice, I'm given a platform, so I'm going to speak up, and I have an idea, right? And that's an idea that makes everyone better. And then, it's the other thing is we're taught not to ask for anything, right? It's always given. Prove yourself and it will be given to you. And through this journey, what I've learned, Angela, and you have been a strong ally and advocate, and you have, given us a lot of wisdom through this journey. But it's like, how do we ask for help? It's okay to ask for help, right? It's okay to say, can you help me with this? I need, resources. And through that, it's like I become a little bit more humble and a little bit more willing to ask. But at the same time, it's that ask comes with that price, right? It's what can I do for you? How can I help you? Because we all have a way to help each other, right? So to me, this journey has been amazing. The fact that I had somebody that tapped me on the shoulder and say, you can do it. And I'm here and I'm going to guide you. And then he started lining up resources for me. And Matt, that's an amazing leader. And now he's like, I want to invest in more women like you. I want to work with more women. So that just validates that, yes, we do have a value. And yes, we can contribute to a better society. And to me, the mission of SpeakTu, it's that we want to make sure that we provide transparency to pay equity within organizations so they can drive meaningful conversations, right? Conversations that impact how the employees show up, how the employees contribute, and ultimately who wants to come and work for that organization, right? Because it matters. And then we want to go back and empower women to ask what they deserve, right? Don't just check the boxes and look at the salary and say, oh, you know what, Angela, I can make a living with that. No. No, I want you to not just make a living. We're talking about life-work balance. It's important that you get compensated what you need and deserve so that you can have a better impact on those around you.
Yeah, so you brought up an interesting point about asking. So I think that there's two things I've learned from people that have been on this podcast. And one is a woman who is also a military spouse, and she works for a telehealth program. And she came on and she was talking about, it was like such great insight. Her name's Michelle. And she said, when you ask, be very intentional what you ask for. Like, do not ask, can I have 15 minutes of your time? Nope, you cannot have 15 minutes of my time. Ask for, I've applied for this job. I would like an introduction to that exact recruiter that is working that job. Or I'm applying for this company and I know that you used to work there. Can you give me some specific compensation guidance? Like, be very intentional, because the chances of you getting a response are so much better, because no one wants open-ended, like I'm about to go spend 15, 20 minutes with someone and I have no idea what it's about and whether I can even help them or not. But if you tell me what you want and you're specific, then I can tell you if I can do that. And I can make a very specific ask of another person and say, I want to introduce you to someone who needs to ask you this question. And that is how you'll get things done. But you're right. If you don't believe in asking for help, none of the rest of it will matter.
It won't. And you know, the other thing that I always tell people, oftentimes I get individuals that are looking for a job or they want an introduction. I oftentimes ask them to write their own introduction. But because by all means, it's important for me to represent who they truly are instead of misrepresenting them. And then they're like, well, that doesn't fit who I am. And I always tell them, you got to protect that brand, right? At the end of the day, your name is a brand and you got to protect that. So you got to be willing to ask for help. But like you said, be very intentional what you're asking and whether you can deliver, right? If you say, hey, Angela, I'm going to send you that by tomorrow, make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to do it. If not, just say, is it okay if I send it to you next week? Because then it makes you look like, it doesn't make them look like their time was valued, right? It was worth speaking to you. So make sure that you respect their individual's time and also follow through.
So when you were in the very large staffing agency that I referenced earlier, what was the key thing that you learned from working with them? Because you saw literally millions of people going into jobs every month. What was the big takeaway that probably the listening audience, very few people have had access in the way that you have? What would you say to a job seeker and very specifically?
You know, one of the things is that oftentimes when we're looking for a job in this market, sometimes people were very afraid of going to a contract role, right? Because people want security. People want a job security. And so it's okay to step into those roles because you never know what it might turn into, right? It might turn into another contract. And if you do extremely well, guess what? That recruiter is always going to be plugging you into the next job.
That's right.
So opportunities are, Angela, you're going to get to learn about a lot of companies and you're going to say, this doesn't fit me so well. You know, I'm ready for the next assignment. I'm going to still give my 100%, but I'm going to go to the next assignment. And it's a great opportunity to learn, right? Get the skills from different companies, you know, and so being, like you said, reaching out to the recruiters is amazing and building those relationships where they remember something about you, right? That they want to endorse you, that they want to be part of your journey. And I tell you, you know, and then, you know, it's that hard, you know, you do get heartbroken sometimes, right? Because what happens is when they lose their job, it impacts you too.
That's
right. You think it's just a staffing from where you're placing people. It's not. You're changing lives. Right. So when their life gets impacted, it hurts. Right. So it's the emotional piece that is so important. for job seekers and also for companies, right? We understand that also companies go through challenges.
Right.
So it's a beautiful mix, right? Because you work with the candidates, you work with the companies, and you really get to kind of match make.
So I do want to address something that I think one of the things that we know that people are concerned about going to work as a contractor is they're afraid of what it'll make their resume look like afterwards. And so I want to drop this tip in there is, let's say you go to work for a staffing agency and they're sending you out on management consulting type roles, and you're there for like 12 weeks, and then you go to another one, you're there for 12 weeks and another one. And maybe you do this for a year or two, even maybe longer. On your resume, do not list each one of those as a separate job. List you were a management consultant, and then you can list all the companies that you've worked for and what you did for that time period. But you want to encapsulate the entire time that you were a contractor as one job, not separate jobs. And the reason why this is so important is because recruiters are going to look at your resume for maybe 6 seconds to try to identify, like, are you the type of person that they want? And one of the things they're looking for, you brought it up earlier, is retention. They're looking for, is this a person that we can hire, invest in, and they'll stay with us? And if they think you change jobs constantly, then they won't think that about you. So that's just one tip. I think that's one of the concerns that we hear from people, like whether or not they want to apply for a contractor role. And I think the other thing is when an economy is in a down, like it, even if it's not a recession, it's just slowed down, staffing actually ramps up. So there's more jobs via staffing than there is direct to an employer. There's more demand, and you can often find a job faster. And sometimes those wages are more competitive because the staffing agency has negotiated a better rate because they're getting a percentage of that total rate.
Absolutely. And most likely because sometimes they're a lot more, they're smaller, they might have access to more opportunities.
That's right.
Than they're going through the recruiter, right? You're probably going to be one out of 1,000 applicants. Right. Where in a staffing firm, you're probably 1 out of 10, out of 20, right? Depending on the size.
Right. Well, and that's actually a really good point, Sue, because you might apply for job A, and the staffing recruiter that you're working for has job B, which is actually better suited for you. But you would never have seen that job because it's kind of what we refer to as like a pocket job. The staffing recruiter has it in their pocket. Mm-hmm. It's not advertised anywhere, but they're looking through the people that apply to fill that job. Yeah, I think that's a great point, great strategy, especially in the current market. Well, so as we wrap up, I would love for you to tell employers right now, like if you could say one thing to them about how they can use SpeakTu to grab the talent that they need and grab that talent in a market that is rich with talent right now. How can they use SpeakTu, and how can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that we're doing at SpeakTu is we're actually offering a fair pay certificate to employers. And we're a third-party certified agency where we look at the data. We look at, again, where they might be able to drive some impact and ultimately own it. So it is important for us not to just give you a certificate that says, yeah, you might have a couple gaps, but let's identify those gaps and let's work through those. And then in a year, you have maybe identified 3 or 4 goals that you want to really focus on. And imagine the impact that it has, Angela, you as an employer saying, you know what, we're working on this. We're not there yet, but we're striving, right? We continue to monitor, again, people, data, and impact. We continue to monitor. And for me, as a female of color, it's definitely it's something that I said, you know what, I do want to work for the organization, right? They might not be there, but they're intentional. They might be looking at salaries coming in. They might be looking at biases within the hiring process. They maybe impact women, right? Because one of the data points that we found, even in our analytics, is that women of color were getting 1.5% salary increases, where other women of non-color were getting 30%.
Wow. That's crazy.
So then it's the conversation, right? It has to be driven by data so that you can start looking at the data to drive those meaningful conversations that close the inequalities. Yeah. So I would say, if you are in California and you need help with the Fair Pay Act reporting, or tool, it has the ability to do it within seconds. So
Okay.
you don't have to go mine and try to, figure out yourself.
Yes.
Our tool gives you the graphics, right? It provides a nice picture that you can just look at it and identify that.
Okay.
And so we're really powered by AI, and AI helps you identify those gaps that might be important for you to look at and to drive those meaningful conversations within your organization.
Excellent. So how do they reach you?
So they can email me at norma@speaktu.com, or they can go to our website at speaktu.com and find all the information. And if you want to do a test on your data, we'll be more than happy to give you a come. Oh my God, I can't even say it. We can give you access to look at the data, and then you decide whether this is worth for you to have as a service. But yeah, we would love to work with you.
So it is SpeakTu. It's SpeakTu.com. That's right. Well, Norma, thank you so much for joining us today. And I think that you have just been a splendid guest for Diversity Cafe. So meaningful to be able to talk to both the candidates and the recruiters and the hiring managers and say, this is how you can not just acquire new talent, but this is how you can retain them fairly. Thank you so much for joining us.